This is where we take your source material, everything you've sent us, and really, well, dive deep. We try to pull out the most important bits of knowledge, the key insights. Think of it as, your personal shortcut. Helps you get really well informed on something specific, tailored just for you.
And our mission today, it's to unpack a pretty compelling set of sources you shared. Specifically, we're looking at an excerpt from an MSNBC transcript. It's discussing recent events related to immigration enforcement down in Los Angeles.
Okay, yeah, let's get into this. So this source, it describes federal immigration authorities, ICE, basically launching these targeted raids right across the city of Los Angeles. It kind of sets the scene for us.
Right. And what jumps out almost immediately from this transcript is the reaction, the intense community response these actions apparently prompted. The source actually reports a massive protest, says it took place right outside the LA headquarters of ICE.
A massive protest.
We ran because one of the persons say ICE in Spanish. So that's how basically the one that scattered, but the elderly people that were not able to run, those were the ones that got caught.
They just told me you have to get back. They kept pushing me back. And I assumed it was just those 3 agents. And then when I turn around, I see that there's a lot of them, just people running, screaming everywhere that ICE was here. They started detaining a couple of other people. There was only one agent that was nice enough to let one of the people that got arrested call their family members and let them know.
Yeah, and it even notes that 2 different protests sort of converged there. One apparently came from the Metropolitan Detention Center downtown.
Okay. And here's where the source gives us some really crucial context, I think, about LA itself. It describes the city as largely minority-majority. So roughly equal numbers of people of color and white residents. And this is significant. It estimates that a full 10% of the population of LA County, which is, huge, one of the biggest counties population-wise,
Huge, yeah.
is undocumented. That could be, maybe as many as 1 million people.
1 million people, potentially, yeah. And what's fascinating, too, is how the source gets into the specifics, the nature of these raids it's reporting on, and where they supposedly happen.
How so?
Well, it calls them large-scale immigration enforcement raids. And it includes these descriptions, citing local media within the source itself, that apparently it felt like the military was actually on the streets of LA.
Like the military.
Yeah.
Really?
That's the description cited, yeah. Mentions of tactical officers, Bearcat vehicles, even flashbang grenades being used.
Wow. Okay. And the locations. The source mentions specific places these things were reportedly happening.
It does, and they're pretty striking. It specifically points to ICE reportedly showing up at places like a Home Depot near MacArthur Park.
Okay.
And the source points out that's a spot where many undocumented folks go to look for work, as day laborers.
Right, I see.
And it even mentions them showing up outside of schools.
Outside schools. Okay, that definitely raises some questions.
Yeah.
Which I guess leads to the impact, right? Does the source talk about that?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It tackles that directly, the impact on the community. It states pretty unequivocally that these actions were, quote, striking fear into the heart of people all throughout this community.
Striking fear.
And that they were seen as, quote, the worst fear for so many people living in Los Angeles. Especially, it notes, since they'd heard President Trump threaten exactly these kinds of actions.
So it wasn't entirely out of the blue, according to this source.
Not according to this account, no. It felt like a feared possibility becoming reality for them.
The source also shows a specific story, doesn't it? A personal one.
It does, yeah. It's quite powerful, actually. It's about a young woman, a Cal firefighter, whose mother was deported.
Right, I remember reading that bit.
And the source really uses that story to underscore its broader point, which is that undocumented people are, deeply woven into the fabric of life in LA. They're neighbors, coworkers, they're in the schools.
Integrated into the community.
Exactly. That's the picture the source paints. And finally, it highlights the reaction from, the local powers that be, the authorities in Los Angeles.
Okay, what did they have to say, according to the transcript?
Well, it notes the sort of historical stance of the LAPD, the Los Angeles Police Department, and the LA County Sheriff's Department. It says they typically do not cooperate with federal immigration enforcement efforts.
Interesting. So a kind of non-cooperation policy.
That's the historical position mentioned, yeah. And then it cites specific statements from officials like the LA Unified School District, the LAPD itself, the mayor, and many city council members. According to the source, they condemned these raids.
They condemn them. Why? What reason did the source give?
Specifically because of the fear the fear they instilled in ordinary people. That's the reason cited in the transcript for the condemnation.
Got it. Okay. So our goal here, just to be clear for you listening, is to walk you through these specific details, these perspectives presented only within this MSNBC transcript excerpt. We just want to help you understand what this particular source seems to reveal about these events and their reported impact. Let's dive in then.
Sounds good.
So starting with the events themselves, right? The source calls them large-scale immigration enforcement raids, and it emphasizes they were targeted across the city.
Right, targeted. And it's not just saying they happened. It tries to give a sense of the intensity, citing those descriptions from local media again, that it felt like the military was there.
Yeah, you mentioned the tactical officers, the Bearcats.
Bearcat vehicles and flashbang grenades. Those specific details are in the source. It really does paint a pretty intense picture.
And those locations the source points to, they feel significant, don't they? Like places where everyday life happens. That Home Depot near MacArthur Park.
Which the source, explicitly identifies as a spot for day laborers.
And then outside of schools. That one really stands out.
That detail about schools, it seems particularly potent, doesn't it? Yeah. According to source, looking at these locations seems key to understanding the sort of intensity of the reaction that came next.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the source describes that reaction as that massive protest outside the ICE headquarters. It makes it sound like this wasn't just a few people. It notes 2 different protest groups actually converging there.
Yeah, the source really stresses the scale, uses words like massive. And it connects it right back to the raids. It says people were mobilizing and very upset. It even quotes someone saying, this is not to be tolerated.
Right. And kind of running through all of this description, the source's description of the community impact, is this constant theme of fear. You mentioned it earlier.
Fear.
The transcript explicitly says these actions were striking fear into the heart of people all throughout this community.
Yes, exactly. And the source portrays this fear as, well, not just some general anxiety, but specifically the worst fear for many folks in LA. And it links that back to President Trump's prior threats that they would do this.
So the fear had a specific context, according to this account.
It seems so, yeah. The source even highlights protest signs mentioned in the transcript, signs calling to get ICE out of our schools and our communities, which again shows how that fear was tied, at least in the protesters' view, to those specific locations where raids were reported.
Schools and communities.
Yeah.
Yeah. And to make that fear and the community impact feel more, tangible, the source includes that really specific personal story, the one about the young woman, Erica Perez.
The Cal firefighter, yeah.
Someone who'd just been out fighting wildfires. And her mother had been deported just days before these raids were happening.
Yeah, that anecdote, as it's presented in the source, it's powerful. And it illustrates the source's kind of broader point, that undocumented people are, quote, in every facet of life here in Los Angeles.
Right.
The source repeats that idea, says they're neighbors, coworkers in our schools. It really emphasizes how integrated this population is described as being, within the city's fabric.
And maybe because of that deep integration, the source highlights a pretty strong reaction from local authorities. You touched on this. It specifically notes that historical position of the LAPD and the LA County Sheriff's Department, stating that does not cooperate with federal immigration enforcement.
Right. That non-cooperation stance seems important context for what comes next in the source. The explicit condemnations from city officials.
Which officials did it mention again?
The transcript mentions statements from the LA Unified School District, the LAPD itself, the mayor, and it says many city council members. All of them, according to the source, basically condemning these raids.
And the key reason the source gives for why they condemned them.
It comes back to fear again.
Yeah.
It's about what they do to the ordinary person in Los Angeles, which the source explicitly describes as instill a massive amount of fear.
So it's a consistent theme throughout the source's account of the local reaction.
Very consistent. What's, I think, compelling, if we're drawing just from this one source, is the picture it paints, right? You have these federal actions described almost as military-like fear-inducing happening in what's described as a deeply integrated urban community. And that prompts this significant pushback, this condemnation, from local officials who are explicitly citing the fear these actions instill in their residents. That's the narrative arc in this transcript excerpt.
Okay, so let's wrap this part up. We've taken a deep dive, based only on this MSNBC transcript excerpt you provided, looking into the reported ICE raids and the whole response in Los Angeles.
Yeah, we've sort of unpacked the source's description of these raids as large-scale, targeted. We looked at the vivid details it includes, like the tactical vehicles, the flashbangs,
Right.
and those specific impactful locations mentioned, like the Home Depot and outside schools.
We looked at the context the source provides about LA's population, large, integrated, undocumented community, maybe 1 million people, and how the source explicitly links the raids to, well, a massive amount of fear, describing it as the worst fear for many.
Mm-hmm. Reflected even in those protest signs the transcript mentioned.
Exactly. And we touched on that powerful personal anecdote presented in the source. The Cal firefighter and her deported mother, which the source uses to underline its point about undocumented individuals being, woven into every part of LA life.
Neighbors, coworkers, in schools, all of that.
Finally, we noted the source's account of how local authorities reacted, highlighting that historical non-cooperation from LAPD and the Sheriff's Department, and then the condemnations from the mayor, city council, others.
Right, and specifically tied by the source to the fear these actions instilled. That was the stated reason for the condemnation.
So what does this all suggest then, drawing strictly from the insights in this particular source? I mean, this deep dive has basically shown us a snapshot, right? It's presented in this transcript.
Yeah, snapshot.
Of a moment where federal enforcement, described in pretty stark terms like military, intersected really dramatically with a local community, a diverse, deeply integrated urban community. And it prompted widespread protest and significant condemnation from local leaders, explicitly citing community fear.
And here's maybe where it gets really interesting, something to think about going forward. The source makes such a point of emphasizing that undocumented people are in every facet of life here in Los Angeles.
It repeats that.
And it describes these raids as instilling this massive amount of fear, which then leads to this broad condemnation from local officials cited in the source. So considering this specific account from this source, what does it suggest about the maybe complexities or challenges of implementing federal policy when it hits the ground?
Right.
When it intersects, as described here, with the existing social fabric, the daily reality, and maybe even the local governance priorities of a huge, diverse city like the one described here.
Yeah, it raises a pretty big question, doesn't it? About how different levels of government action, at least as they're presented in this source, might be perceived and received within the complex reality of a place like Los Angeles.
Definitely something to mull over.
Indeed. Something to mull over after this deep dive. Thanks for joining us.